Hello and welcome to Andy and Ian Talk Networking. I am Andy,
Hey, and I am Ian.
and we're going to be talking about a whole range of topics over the coming weeks and months. And today, based on last week's discussion where we talked a little bit about what is network observability, I think today we probably ought to, Ian, dig a little bit into taps and spans. And this is kind of something that,
Ooh,
when
exciting.
I started, it was kind of new to me, and I kind of came from the networking arena, and taps and spans, I kind of couldn't really figure out which one I would need. So, just to start everybody off, let's just kick off with what is the difference between a tap and a span?
Well, a tap is it's a physical break in the infrastructure, fiber usually, and that's the really the key thing with a tap port. You're really then it's kind of on all the time because it's obviously
Hmm.
been inserted into your network. A span is a kind of a software construct, usually switch router, large infrastructure element, and you kind of enable it. You kind of you turn on a span as and when you need it, or possibly all the time, but more likely as and when you need it. So that's
Okay.
kind of your quick 100,000 foot view there, Andy.
Okay, yeah. So really, what you're saying is a tap is kind of just cutting the fiber, cutting the optics, and you're
Yeah.
taking a small portion of that signal and feeding it out to your tools that are going to process it. And your span is much more of a software layer two, kind of layer three. Kind of feeding the data out when you need it. So it's a kind of it's a different approach. But presumably, when you start looking at kind of the deployment models and how people start using, and they're making the choice between taps and spans, what really kind of makes the difference or makes the decision easier for people when they want to go one way or the other?
I think the kind of slightly overly simplistic way to see it is it's really about performance, right?
Hmm.
Because as you said yourself, I'm going to basically cut the fiber. It's not, it's taking a tiny fraction of that light, so it's not
Hmm.
really impacting the data traffic as it's going through. But obviously, something like a span port, when you enable it, that's taking system resources away
Okay.
from whatever the other device was doing, router, switch, whatever. I'll
Hmm.
just say device. Um, so that is really the key point. The tap is there, it's all the time, it's operating, and it's not impacting the performance of the application or the infrastructure. The span will have some kind of impact, maybe not significant, but it will have an impact. And obviously, in a stressful network environment, or you want to have too many spans, it really will have a
Right.
level of impact on the performance of the application or infrastructure.
And presumably, when you do the deployment, one of the big advantages I would say with a tap is that you've always got that data. So
Yeah.
there's no configuration. Once you've put that tap in and you've taken the hit to kind of break into the network to get that tap, you've
Yep.
always got that data coming out 24/7, 365 days a year coming into your tools. Whereas
Yeah.
a span, if you haven't configured the span, you could easily be missing pieces of information that are crucial for network diagnostics. So that's kind of one of the biggest things that I see between the two kind of technologies.
I know completely right, Andy. I think though that obviously as I travel around speaking with customers, a lot of folks like the tap
Hmm.
model because exactly as you said, it's there all the time. If they need the data, it's already being sent to the tools, etc., etc. Hopefully by a packet broker. But the point being is that it's going to the tools all the time. The span team, or the folks who are interested in spans, are probably using it maybe in a more ad hoc way.
Right.
Oh, I
Yeah.
have seen something. I have
Now
seen
I'm going to
something I
go in
don't
and
understand.
yeah,
Now I'm going to go in and I'll set it up, and that'll forward the data
yeah.
out to the tool, still via potentially a packet broker, still via all that kind of mechanism.
Hmm.
But rather than kind of pre-building the infrastructure, you kind of do it. after the fact. Now, I don't mean that to be negative,
No,
because
no.
obviously it just depends on the use case that the
Yeah, and it depends on
customer.
what it is you're trying to do with the observability of your network. If you've got a compliance issue where you absolutely have to see everything for
Oh yeah,
compliance to make sure people are aware that I'm not being screwed over because I'm getting less latency or more latency than my competition. So yeah,
yeah.
if there's a compliance issue, they may prefer to go down one path. But if it's just a general network, maybe I need to see what's going on here before I make some changes to the network, they can probably go down a slightly different span path.
But by the way, Andy, you actually just highlighted something really, really important. The idea of latency.
Mm,
Just a tiny little sidebar. Bottom line is, if you're using a tap, then you are seeing the packet
right.
exactly as it's transiting the network.
Yes.
And therefore, if you're putting time stamping or that kind of situation into the
Yeah.
packet,
You're not going
you're
all
get
the way
you,
out through
yeah,
the.
you're
Yeah.
not going all the way up to the top of the management stack in your switch stroke
Yeah.
router
Right.
device, and then it's sending out.
Yeah.
So therefore, you're introducing massive amounts of, or relatively
Yeah.
speaking, I should say, massive amounts of latency.
Yeah, which obviously when you're trying to pull together a very high performance 100 gig 400 gig network, you're trying to see exactly the order the packets come in. That could be really important as well. So yeah,
Hmm.
so when you actually look at it, then there's quite a lot of pros and cons for both. I can definitely see in certain applications, maybe like finance and things like or government, where they would want to go taps 100%. They need very high accuracy, they need incredible latency resolution,
Yeah.
but and from a conformance and compliance perspective. But then more of an enterprise sector, you could almost say, well, actually they're more interested in fault finding or issue resolution. Maybe they're more of a span kind of an arena.
Yeah, I think, as you say, it's probably not kind of a one
Yeah.
size fits all kind of model, but the spirit is to actually take a kind of a conscious decision. That's really the key thing, to analyze the use case that you, the customer or the NetOps team or whatever, what do you really want to see?
Hmm.
Right? Do you really want to see, if you're a SecOps team, I would hope that you're thinking about taps because you want to see all the data all the time.
Yeah.
But if you're a NetOps team that's a little bit overstretched and you really just want to kind of fault find as you need, then probably, spans are going to give you a lot.
Yeah.
I still think taps are going to win, but for me, I think it's not a kind of a clean sweep in any
Sure.
direction, to be
Yeah,
frank.
and to be fair, there's probably a justification for both in a network.
Yes.
You could certainly see certain places within the network where you'd want to deploy taps for low latency. Absolutely got to see everything. Maybe in and out, ingress and egress out of your firewalls and your routers. They would be a classic example of where you'd want to see everything at layer one.
Yeah.
But then as you go further and deeper in the network, where you're more application focused maybe, and maybe it's HTTP or kind of that sort of level, maybe you don't need to see absolutely every single packet, and you can get away with a higher order span.
Yep. I think you've pretty much cracked it there, Andy. To be honest, I think that's really a good way to see it. As I say, there are sometimes a little bit of
Hmm.
kind of, I'm a tap guy, I'm a span guy, that kind of style. But I think it's
There
much
always
more.
is.
I think it's much more nuanced. I think, as you just highlighted and pointed out, it's much more nuanced than that. The point is, what's the application, or what's the use case that the customer is trying to solve, and then if it is compliance, if it is always on, all of that stuff is really, really critical. I'm still enthusiastic, positive towards the kind of the tap model. Whereas, as you said, if it's a little bit softer, maybe a little bit more focused on a kind of an application layery type thing, then I think maybe things like spans give people a little bit of flexibility, because you're not going to tap every link in your whole infrastructure.
No.
That sounds great, but
Yeah. Yeah, I
probably
mean,
not
and
terribly
as you get up
practical.
to hundreds of gigabits, and just the cost alone of all those taps in a network is kind of astronomical, really. And also,
Yeah.
you have to manage it all, because you've gone from just a point-to-point connection between a switch and an endpoint. Now you've got to put a tap in there. You've got plus you've got the taps to go off into your packet brokers or your sampling and your tools. You're kind of growing the complexity of your network, which makes it even harder to manage.
Yeah, once again, all comes back to the application, definitely.
Okay, great. So I think from my perspective, I think that really kind of outlines a lot of kind of the conclusions that I came to over the last few months and years about, you know, taps versus spans. And I think really from my perspective, I think the real key thing is when you want to see absolutely everything, and you know, you really want to see the latency, the timing, and everything that's going on with your network, your tap is your better option. But when you really just kind of ad hoc need to go in and fish around and figure out what's going on, you know, maybe the span is the solution. So obviously, again though, assuming that your networking infrastructure can support spanning, you know, capability,
Yes.
because again, that's not always a given in a lot of cases.
Yeah. I think that's another podcast for another day, Andy. But yes, I think you're absolutely hitting it right there, because is the infrastructure ready to generate spans? What are some of the performance limitations, even in these super high order, high functioning kind of devices? If you've got, 400 gig switches, or soon to
Yep,
be 800 gig switches,
and
and you're
beyond.
saying,
Yeah,
hey, let's take everything from port one and send it to the span port.
great. That's port
you know
one. What about the other 23
yeah,
ports on the
yeah,
switch?
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Things like that. So you're gonna get some real odd effects there, and certainly something that needs to be considered. And yes, there's a big management overhead, as you mentioned a
yeah,
few minutes ago, but it the question is, what are you trying to do, right? The point is, are you super concerned about your infrastructure? Do you is it material to
yeah.
your operation that the network continues to operate seamlessly, or at least if there is an issue, you can very quickly dig into it? If that is the case, I would once again strongly encourage things like taps, because it gives you just that precision
That
and
level
the
of resolution.
visibility
Yeah,
on all the things without overloading these large core networking infrastructure devices that you need to be able to run your network.
yep, I agree. Okay, that's great. I think we've kind of finished it off there. I want to thank everybody for watching, and yep, I've been Andy,
And I've been Ian.
and appreciate your time, and we'll see you all next time.